State your name. The voice shattered the air like a rifle crack, sharp and sudden against the steady rhythm of boots on pavement. The courtyard was still damp from the morning's dew, but the heat had already begun to rise, pressing down on the rows of young recruits standing stiff-backed and silent in formation. Sergeant Cole Ramsey stormed down the line, campaign hat low, spit flying from the corner of his mouth. His face was flushed red with command, jaw tight with the kind of practiced rage that came from years of perfecting intimidation. He stopped abruptly in front of the last man on the left, an older figure standing among a sea of 20-somethings. "Hey, I said state your name, now!" The man didn't blink. He didn't flinch. He simply stood there, straight and still, arms at his sides, eyes calm behind weathered lids. His face was lined, not from fear, but from time. His name tag read only Leland, no rank, no unit, no designation. Ramsey's lip curled. He took a step closer, nose nearly touching the older man's. "Are you deaf, old man? I said state. Your name." The recruits didn't laugh. They didn't move. They watched, breath held. Something in the air had shifted. The man looked at Ramsey, his eyes steady, neither angry nor submissive, just aware. Behind them, the sound of boots approached at a quick but respectful pace. A junior officer carried a red-marked folder in one hand, clutched tight against his chest. The tab on the corner read, "Restricted Access, Classified Identifier," in bold black ink. The name at the top had just been uncovered. Ramsey didn't see him coming. He didn't know what was inside. But the name he was demanding was already classified. If you believe every veteran deserves respect, please subscribe, because every view helps this message reach those who need it most. Frank Leland did not move when the sergeant shouted. He didn't bristle. He didn't react. His posture remained locked, not with the stiffness of confusion, but with the practiced steadiness of someone who had stood through worse storms than this. The late morning light fell across his shoulders, cutting through the trees and striping his pale green field shirt with long golden lines. The cotton was faded at the collar, its stitching frayed where it tucked beneath his throat. His boots weren't standard issue. They were older, leather brown and scuffed smooth at the toe, laced tight by hand with loops tied flat like he'd done it the same way for 50 years. There was no visible rank, no insignia, just the simple patch on his chest. White background, black letters, Leland. Recruits along the line exchanged nervous glances. No one dared speak. Some looked to Ramsey for what came next. Others looked at the old man with a mix of discomfort and curiosity, trying to place him. Was he part of the program? A test? A mistake? Rumors had already circled since dawn. A few said he was some senator's relative, here to observe. Others guessed he was from the Veterans Affairs Office, a paper pusher maybe, here to evaluate the new leadership course. But there was something in the way he stood. Too quiet, too still. Captain Ellen Reese had seen his name on the intake log just an hour earlier. She hadn't thought much of it at first. The listing was brief. Franklin Leland, Observer, Mentorship Pilot Program, Clearance, Temporary, Authorization, External. No branch listed, no attached personnel file, no photo, no birth date. Just a time of arrival, and a signature written in steady, even letters, the kind you only saw from a certain era. He had arrived with nothing but a small green duffel and a notebook. No bag of gear, no laptop. Just the notebook, worn and leather-bound, carried under his arm with the same respect one might offer a flag. He hadn't spoken to anyone, hadn't introduced himself. He simply arrived at dawn, stood quietly at the edge of the field, and watched. Now, standing at the end of the formation line under a growing cloud of tension, Frank Leland remained unshaken. He didn't look at Ramsey. He looked through him, not in defiance, but with the patience of someone who understood that some questions didn't deserve answers until they were asked with respect. Behind the rows of recruits, the junior officer still approached, file in hand, breath slightly short from the walk across the lot. The red tab on the folder trembled just slightly in the breeze, marked with government seals and initials unfamiliar to most modern records. The sergeant hadn't seen it, but someone had. Today, someone finally decided to press him. The training field baked slowly beneath the sun, its cracked concrete paths radiating heat into the soles of the boots that passed over them. Recruits marched in staggered lines, practicing dismount drills and rifle handling under the sharp guidance of barking corporals. Orders rang across the open air, sharp, clipped, precise. Sweat soaked into necklines and sleeves. Some grunted under their breath, some smirked. All were being watched. Frank Leland moved slowly across the edge of the grounds, never in the way, never uncertain. His stride was deliberate, not stiff, but grounded, like a man who knew how to pace his steps without wasting a single one. He carried no clipboard, no radio, just that same leather notebook, held in one hand, his thumb resting along the spine. The pages were already half open, blank sheets marked with tightly packed handwriting, the kind of script that bent slightly right, steady and even, each letter squared with care. He paused near a young recruit, struggling to disassemble a sidearm during a timed test. The man's hands were sweating, fingers trembling as the sergeant counted down from 10. Frank didn't speak. He only tilted his head. A small angle, barely perceptible, as if watching the boy's grip from over a shoulder, remembering something long buried. The recruit glanced up and saw him. Their eyes met for a second, not long, but long enough to carry meaning. The recruit blinked, adjusted, disassembled the weapon, beat the time by 1 second. Frank said nothing, then moved on. Nearby, a pair of younger men watched him pass. "Why's the old guy just standing there all the time?" one muttered. "Probably thinks he's back in Nam," the other said under his breath. Neither laughed out loud, but the smirk between them carried far enough. Frank didn't turn. He had heard it. He heard everything. He stopped near a weapons bench where a recruit had accidentally dropped a helmet on the asphalt. No one picked it up. The others stepped around it like it was a rock in the road. But Frank bent slowly, not because his back demanded it, but because his respect did. He lifted the helmet with both hands, dusted off the chin strap, and placed it back on the rack exactly as it had been left. A few recruits watched. One frowned. One rolled his eyes. From across the field, Drill Sergeant Ramsey noticed the motion. His hands were behind his back, pacing slowly along the line of his squad, face still flushed from the earlier exchange. His eyes narrowed. He stepped off the line and began walking toward Frank. Slow at first, then faster. As Frank moved to the next bench, still silent, still observing, Ramsey's voice rang out once more. "You planning to coach my whole squad today? Or are you just here to supervise my shoelaces?" The question wasn't really a question. Frank turned slightly, not toward Ramsey, just enough to acknowledge the voice. "I'm here to observe," he said evenly. Ramsey stepped closer, voice louder now. "Observe from where, sir? I wasn't told I'd be evaluated by a retiree with no clearance and no uniform." Frank looked at him, calm. His voice didn't rise. "I was told I'd be needed here." Ramsey scoffed, gesturing to the recruits. "Well, they're not your men, and this isn't your field. So unless you're planning to enlist again today, I'd suggest stepping back from my perimeter." Frank didn't argue. He nodded once. The kind of nod you give to an order you know doesn't deserve your breath. He stepped back, not out of defeat, not even out of submission, just out of an understanding that some battles aren't fought in the open. But Ramsey didn't stop watching him. The tension had begun to settle around the edges of the field, like fog before a storm. And even if no one knew it yet, the temperature was rising. The sun climbed higher, casting hard shadows across the drill field. The cadence of boots and barks continued in rhythm, but there was a subtle shift in the atmosphere, like a low hum beneath the surface of sound. It wasn't just heat anymore. It was a tension. Tension. The kind that grows when something out of place refuses to explain itself. Frank Leland stood once more near the perimeter, notebook still in hand, unmoved by the glares that trailed him like whispers in the wind. He had chosen a spot beneath the flagpole's long reach, a vantage point with full view of the training lanes and obstacle courses. His pen touched paper from time to time, a notation, a date, an adjustment, each motion precise. Nothing wasted. A group of recruits began weapons form drills, lining up single file, practicing controlled carry posture and transitions. One young man in the middle hesitated mid-turn, elbow too wide. Frank stepped forward half a pace, lifted his hand, not a command, just a gesture, and lightly corrected the stance with 2 fingers at the elbow. No words, no disruption. But Ramsey saw. From across the range, he strode forward with visible heat in his stride, the muscles in his jaw tight. His campaign hat cast a sharp line of shadow across his brow as he stormed toward the veteran. "You! Out!" he roared, hand extended like a blade toward Frank. "Civilians don't touch my men!" Frank didn't flinch. He stepped back from the recruit and lowered his hand, calm as ever. Ramsey kept coming. "You think you get to walk around like some ghost of the past, poking at my formation? You're not part of this outfit. You're not on my sheet, and you sure as hell don't train my squad." Frank opened his mouth to respond, but chose not to. He simply inclined his head once, then stepped fully back. The young recruit who had been corrected looked down at his elbow, then at Frank, then quickly straight ahead, saying nothing. From a few yards away, laughter broke through the discomfort. Someone muttered loud enough to be heard. "Grandpa's back on the warpath." Another voice chimed in, exaggerated and high-pitched, mimicking Frank's silence. "Ghost of the drill field strikes again." Ramsey sneered and pointed at Frank directly. "You want to stand out here? Then line up like the rest of them. You want to play soldier? Fine, join the ranks." A few of the recruits stiffened, unsure whether to laugh or obey. The mockery lingered awkwardly in the air, searching for a place to land. Frank looked at the line, then at Ramsey. Then, with no sarcasm, no smirk, walked into place at the far end of the formation. The moment shifted. Even Ramsey seemed caught off guard by the quiet compliance. Frank squared his shoulders, lifted his chin, and stood at attention, his hands at his sides, his boots perfectly placed beneath him. He didn't speak. He didn't question. He simply existed as if he belonged there. An administrative officer, Lieutenant Branston, who had been logging scores on the far side of the range, glanced up from his clipboard. He furrowed his brow and started walking toward Ramsey. "Sergeant, is this really necessary?" Branston asked quietly. Ramsey didn't even look at him. "This isn't a museum tour. If he wants to stay on my field, he plays by the rules. Formation or off base, simple." Branston hesitated. "He was cleared by—" "Then they can clear him to stand," Ramsey snapped, ending the exchange. Branston looked toward Frank. Their eyes met. There was something unreadable there. Not frustration, not defeat, just stillness and time. One of the younger recruits, dark-haired, face still boyish, leaned slightly toward Frank without turning his head. "Are you actually going to do the whole thing?" Frank replied without moving. "Yes." Ramsey turned back to the group. "Eyes front. Let's see if Grandpa remembers how to march." No one laughed this time. And still, the old soldier didn't flinch. The formation stood under the weight of the noon sun, shoulders tense, faces streaked with sweat. Boots dug into the cracked surface of the courtyard, dust rising with every heel set and shifted. Even the air had a kind of resistance to it now, thick, unmoving, like the final hour of a long march. Muscles ached, foreheads burned, and patience thinned among the youngest men in uniform. But not in Frank Leland. At the far left end of the line, where the sun offered no relief and the shadow of the flagpole stopped just short of his boots, Frank stood as if the heat hadn't touched him. He breathed evenly through his nose, hands relaxed but still at attention, the lines of his shirt clinging slightly to his ribs with sweat that had long since soaked in. He didn't fidget, didn't adjust his stance. His gaze remained level, not locked on the horizon, not glazed over, but aware. When the squad was ordered to stand at ease, men across the line broke form just enough to roll their shoulders or stretch their necks. Some wiped sweat from their brows with a thumb. Others glanced subtly from side to side, eyes darting toward the old man at the end. Frank remained exactly as he had been, back straight, hands folded lightly behind him, boots shoulder-width apart, no wasted motion. And yet, it wasn't stiffness. It wasn't stubbornness. It was something else, something deeper, the kind of stillness that doesn't come from discipline alone, but from remembrance. He was not just holding a pose, he was holding space for those who no longer could. One of the recruits, the same boy Frank had corrected earlier, shifted slightly in place and cast a sidelong glance toward him. His eyes narrowed, not in judgment now, but in something closer to thought. He whispered under his breath, "He hasn't moved once." The recruit next to him whispered back, "Probably can't." But the first recruit shook his head. "No, he's choosing not to." On the opposite end of the courtyard, Ramsey watched. His arms were crossed over his chest, his jaw tight as he scanned the line. His eyes landed on Frank again and again, as if expecting, needing to see a crack, a falter, some visible flaw in the image he had tried to tear down. But there was none. When the squad was ordered to drop for planks, Frank lowered himself to the ground with the same deliberate care he had shown in every movement. No groan, no grunt. His palms hit the dirt, elbows locked, toes braced, back perfectly flat. His shirt wrinkled along the spine, and a small patch of dust rose behind his boots as he shifted forward into position. Ramsey's voice thundered again. "Hold it! 1 minute, no sagging!" The recruits strained, faces clenched, arms shook, but Frank remained still, like iron forged long before anyone here had been born. Captain Ellen Reese had been observing from the edge of the obstacle course, clipboard balanced against her hip. She said nothing, made no move, just watched. The corners of her mouth were unreadable. Not a smile, not a frown, just quiet tension forming behind her eyes. As the seconds ticked on, the youngest men in the squad began to tremble. One dropped, another followed. Ramsey yelled. Frank didn't react, not to the yelling, not to the dust, not to the boy beside him whose elbows buckled and whose chest hit the ground with a breathless grunt. And still Frank held the line. Even the way he adjusted his boots before standing again carried the same energy, subtle but unmistakable, like someone who had been taught long ago that posture was not about pride, but presence. The squad returned to standing, faces red, arms heavy. Frank stood too, without wobble, without help. His breath never caught in his throat. His hands, though weathered and creased with time, never once showed a tremor. The recruit beside him glanced again, this time with eyes narrowed, not in mockery, but in curiosity. Something about this man, the precision, the quiet, the refusal to break, felt familiar in a way that had nothing to do with the current uniform. He was not performing. He was remembering. And someone else had begun to wonder who he really was. The courtyard held its breath. The squad stood at parade rest now, boots flat in the dust, chests heaving from the last round of drills. Frank remained silent in the line, still and composed, his face unreadable in the haze of sunlight. And from the far edge of the field, beneath a corrugated awning of the operations deck, Captain Ellen Reese stood with her clipboard unmoved in her hands. She hadn't taken a note in 5 minutes. The captain wore the authority of a woman who had earned every ounce of her presence. Sleeves rolled, hair pinned with precision, eyes shaded beneath the edge of a standard-issue cap. But it was her posture that told the truth. She wasn't observing anymore. She was calculating. The admin tent behind her rustled as a light breeze passed through. One of the clerks stepped out, a young officer with narrow shoulders and a nervous gait. He held a manila folder pressed tight to his chest, a thick one, marked with red tape on the upper spine and a bold stamp across the front. Restricted, confidential access only. He didn't know who it was for, just that he'd been told to hand it directly to Reese. She took it without a word, eyes never leaving the field. She didn't open it right away. Not yet. She watched as Ramsey paced along the opposite end, shouting again at a recruit who had miscounted his push-ups. She noted how his volume rose when tired eyes looked away, how he barked louder when someone hesitated, and how, again and again, his gaze drifted to the older man standing at the edge of the formation. That quiet presence, still upright, still calm, still not bending. Then, finally, she opened the folder. Her eyes scanned the top page, slowly at first. Then again, this time with stillness creeping over her features. Her brows lowered by a fraction. Her breathing changed. Frank Leland. Age, 75. Former status, restricted. Active years, 1966-1976. Notes, clearance level Delta. Assignment, Black Phoenix program. Her eyes narrowed. No photographs, no decorations listed, no formal discharge explanation. Just an initial stamp across the margin in faded ink. Eyes only, Directorate Retention Order 601B. Below it, a single line handwritten in black ink. Do not engage unless authorized. Observe. Defer. She turned the page slowly. No history of formal commendation. No enlistment record easily accessible. Just notes. Fragmented, coded, the kind of language that lived in the folds of programs no longer discussed out loud. She lifted her gaze to the field again. Frank hadn't moved. Ramsey's voice cut through the air once more. Louder this time. A demand, not a command. Directed at Frank. Reese's hand closed the file. Her thumb tapped the edge once, a soundless punctuation. She hadn't planned to intervene, but then she saw what they had all missed. Not a retiree, not a visitor, not a man out of place, but someone whose record didn't fit in the system, because he had helped build the system itself. She set the clipboard down, and for the first time that day, she took a step forward. The sun had shifted just enough to cast the long shadow of the flagpole across the formation, its narrow line dragging itself like a sundial across the concrete. The squad was called to attention again. Sweat clung to their backs. The heat made the concrete smell like hot stone and rubber. Boots shuffled. A cough broke the quiet. And then, Drill Sergeant Ramsey's voice tore through the stillness once more. "I said, state your name!" He was inches from Frank now, nose flared, breath coming heavy through clenched teeth. His hand chopped through the air for emphasis, his voice cracking with the strain of too many hours spent shouting orders that did not land the way he wanted them to. Frank did not move, not at first. He stood exactly as he had, gaze steady, not defiant but patient. His lips parted just slightly, then closed again. He breathed in, slow and measured. Ramsey's hands curled into fists. "Are you deaf, old man? You think this is a joke? You think standing here with your notebook and your silence makes you something special?" Frank looked at him, truly looked at him, as if he were not being spoken to, but through. Then finally he spoke. His voice was low, even. "You wouldn't recognize the name." Ramsey blinked, caught off guard by the softness, then stepped forward again, challenging. "Try me." Without any flair, without any hesitation, Frank reached up, unpinned the small laminated tag clipped to his shirt, the one that simply read, "Leland, Advisor," and handed it over, palm open, steady. Ramsey snatched it from his hand. Behind him, the steady rhythm of boots approached. Captain Reese walked with purpose, holding the same manila folder from before. She said nothing. She simply moved beside Ramsey and opened the file in front of him. She didn't speak, didn't have to. She held the first page up, where he could see it. Ramsey's eyes dropped. The blood in his face drained. His jaw loosened, and his fingers gripped the name tag a little too tight. Frank stood silent beside them. No change in posture. No reaction. On the top line of the page, typed in bold across a black bar, Franklin Leland, Black Phoenix Program, 1971-1976. Classified, eyes only. Ramsey's voice dropped an octave, almost disbelieving. "Is this real?" Reese didn't look at him. Her eyes were on Frank. Every word, the entire field, once filled with chatter and scuffs and throat clearing and restless shifting, had gone still. Even the wind seemed to pause. The flag above them barely stirred. "The recruits," who had watched Frank all day as a curiosity or a punchline, now stood rooted in place, unsure whether to move, to speak, or to look away. Frank reached out and took his name tag back, refastened it to his chest. Ramsay stepped back, 2 slow paces, his boots heavy now, as if every step had suddenly gained weight. The silence was full, not awkward, not afraid, but listening. Frank turned his head slowly, surveying the squad, not in judgment, not in pride, but in memory. For the first time that morning, no one questioned his presence. He was not out of place. He was exactly where he was meant to be. The stillness held like a low hum beneath the surface of the courtyard. Not empty, but charged. It was not the silence of confusion, nor embarrassment. It was the kind that followed realization, the kind that left grown men blinking at the space around them, wondering how long they had been looking, and yet not seeing. Frank Leland had not moved, and yet something around him had changed. Or perhaps, within the others, something had finally opened. Captain Reese didn't speak again. She didn't need to. She closed the file, the hard clap of the manila folder sharp in the quiet. Then she held it at her side, like a weight she didn't intend to put down soon. Her chin dipped once, not a nod of command, but of regard. She turned and walked back toward the operations tent. Not another word, not even a glance back. Frank returned to his position in the line, not because he had to, but because he chose to. One by one, the recruits adjusted. Not in perfect sync, not military drilled, but naturally. A ripple of posture shifting, shoulders straightening, feet resetting into cleaner alignment. A young private, no older than 21, blinked rapidly and looked down at the dust near his boots. He reached up, almost unconsciously, and removed his cap. He held it to his chest. No order had been given. No bugle called for respect. It was just time. A whisper passed among the line, barely audible. Not words, but the sound of breath catching in a throat, of understanding dawning not through teaching, but witnessing. Frank's eyes moved slowly across the row, not searching, just observing, as he had done all morning. Only now the gazes that met his did not carry mockery or dismissal, or the passive shield of boredom. They carried recognition, a kind of quiet apology, spoken through the squint of the eyes, the tightening of jaws, the way chests lifted with a little more meaning. Ramsay stood apart now, not commanding, not barking, just present. His jaw worked slightly as if trying to find a word he hadn't used in a long time. Something between regret and respect. But it didn't come. So instead, he looked down, not in shame, not entirely, but in humility. A gust of wind stirred the flags again. The one above the courtyard snapped gently in its chains, casting a stuttered shadow across the concrete. The sound was crisp, clean, like a page being turned in a very old book. Frank turned toward Captain Reese, who had paused just before stepping back inside. Their eyes met across the stretch of sun and dust. No smile, no salute, just a shared knowing, deep, older than either rank or regulation. She inclined her head slightly. He nodded once in return, and that was enough. In that moment, words would have only diminished what had passed. There was no ceremony, no raised voice, no speech carved in stone, just presence, just time, just the sound of boots softening in the dirt as the line held still, and the wind carried away what had once been doubt. Here, finally, the old soldier was seen, not because he demanded it, but because he had earned it long before any of them were born. Captain Reese did not return to the command tent. Instead, she stepped to the edge of the field, where the heat rising from the blacktop shimmered like vapor between the rows of men. She didn't call for attention. She simply raised her voice just enough to be heard, level, clear, and without ceremony. "Frank Leland," she began, her eyes still on the man in the formation, "served this country in a capacity that few in this yard, including myself, will ever fully comprehend." A breeze moved across the courtyard, light but certain, as if even the air paused to listen. She held up the file for a moment, not dramatically, but with intention. His record does not appear in standard databases. There are no decorations listed, no campaign badges, because where he served, names were not taken, orders were not written, files were burned, not filed. Her voice softened, but her tone did not lose strength. He trained men who never wore insignias, operated in theaters that don't exist on our maps. When we read tactics today, when we drill modern formations, when we speak of survival scenarios in worst-case simulations, much of it was learned from what he and his team endured. There was no movement among the recruits now, no foot shifting, no coughs, just silence. Frank remained still, his eyes fixed not on Reese but somewhere past her, as if hearing her words stirred the edges of an old memory, too sharp to look at directly. Reese lowered the file. There are no records of commendation because men like Frank were told not to be seen. They were told to disappear before the first shot, to vanish after the last one, and when they came home, they weren't met with flags or parades. Just silence. Frank blinked slowly once. He gave no other sign of emotion, but in the way his hands opened slightly at his sides, fingers loose, no longer closed, it was clear something was being released. Not forgiven, just acknowledged. A young recruit, standing 3 rows back, cleared his throat. It wasn't defiance, it was permission-seeking. Reese looked toward him, gave a small nod. The recruit's voice cracked at the start. "Sir, I mean..." He paused, corrected himself. "Mr. Leland, I'm sorry. We didn't know." Frank turned his head just slightly, met the young man's gaze. He stepped forward, just 1 pace, and placed a hand on the recruit's shoulder. Firm, heavy with experience, but not punishing. "You learn fast," Frank said, voice quiet but unmistakable. "That's how you come home." A long, deep silence followed. Not awkward, not waiting, just present. The file in Reese's hands dropped to her side once more. No one asked any more questions, because finally, there was nothing left to say. Captain Reese moved forward slowly, her boots quiet against the edge of the concrete. Her posture was unchanged, upright, centered, but something in her eyes had softened. She stood beside Frank, then turned to face the line of recruits and instructors, her voice rising only slightly above the stillness. "As of this moment, Frank Leland is granted full mentorship authority on this installation," she said. "No observation status, no visitor clearance, permanent advisor by direct order." There was no paper handed over, no handshake, no saluting. It was spoken into existence, and that was enough. Ramsey stood behind the squad now, his shoulders tight, hands behind his back. He took 1 measured step forward, then another, and came to stand a few feet from Frank. His gaze was steady, not proud, not broken, just awake, as if for the first time he was seeing not just a man, but a map of every lesson he had ever skimmed past. "Permission to speak freely," Ramsey said, voice low. Frank looked at him. He nodded once. Ramsey cleared his throat. "I misjudged you. I was wrong." The words came slowly. "If there's anything I can do." Frank didn't let him finish. "Teach better," he said. The words were neither harsh nor kind, just true. Yelling's not the same as leading. Ramsey nodded barely, his jaw locked in place, but there was no anger left behind it, only acceptance. The recruits began to shift into alignment again, not because they were commanded, but because something within them now asked to stand straighter. They fell into formation, row by row, but this time the stiffness was gone. Their stances were clean, real, the kind that comes not from fear, but respect. Frank walked slowly along the line. His steps were quiet but grounded. He paused in front of each man, didn't speak, didn't inspect, just looked, not through them, into them. 1 recruit met his gaze and didn't blink. Another adjusted the strap on his vest without being told. A third, barely older than 19, swallowed hard and nodded, not for permission, but in silent recognition of something he hadn't understood until now. Reese stood back, watching. Ramsay remained still, and Frank, without declaration or ceremony, became the fixed center of the yard. The way they looked at him now, it wasn't awe, it wasn't fear, it wasn't even apology. It was honor, and it had been earned not by rank, not by title, not by proof, but by silence, patience, and presence. 1 week later, the morning air hung cool and quiet over the courtyard. The sun had not yet reached its full weight, and the shadows of the flagpole still stretched long and clean across the tarmac. A new drill group stood at ease, restless in the way all first-day units are, uncertain, still learning the rhythm of posture and silence, waiting for direction. The routine was unchanged. Recruits were forming ranks. Sergeants paced. Clipboards flicked open and closed. Boots tapped. But something subtle had shifted. It lived in the space between commands, in the pauses between orders. A kind of respect, invisible but present, like a trace of smoke long after the fire. Near the edge of the courtyard, beneath the low arms of an oak tree that had stood through more classes than any one person could count, sat a folding chair. In it, comfortably but upright, was Frank Leland. He wore the same jacket, the same worn boots, the same name tag, now laminated with a new border that marked Permanent Advisor. His hands rested in his lap. He held nothing. No clipboard, no field notes, just watched. Beside him sat a small wooden table, no larger than a footlocker, upon which sat 2 cups, one black coffee, untouched, and the other a sealed canteen. No one had brought them while others watched, but they had been placed there. Captain Reese stood at the command post. She didn't introduce Frank, didn't reference him in her orders. She didn't need to. His presence now spoke for itself. Drill Sergeant Ramsay stood across the field, posture crisp. There was no trace of the scowl, no barked orders echoing from him this morning. He carried himself differently now, still firm, still sharp, but with something quieter beneath the edge, a steadiness that hadn't been there before. He looked toward the oak, then back to the recruits. As the new class began their warm-up drill, one of them, a younger man, barely out of high school by the look of him, nudged the soldier beside him and whispered, "Who's the old guy in the chair?" Ramsay heard the question. He didn't scold. He didn't raise his voice. He walked slowly to where the 2 stood, paused beside them, then answered plainly. "That's not an old guy," he said, eyes still forward. "That's the reason this program exists." The recruit blinked, looked again at Frank, who met his gaze for a moment, then nodded, not with command, but with quiet acknowledgement. The recruit nodded back, stood a little straighter, and said nothing more. Across the field, the sun finally climbed over the barracks roof, casting full light across the rows of standing men. The flag snapped once in the breeze. Frank remained seated beneath the oak, watching, not measuring, not judging, just witnessing. And from that day forward, every class that passed through those gates would begin their first drill under his gaze, a tradition not written in policy, not spoken in orders, but known by all. A new legacy had taken root, and no one would ever forget his name again. If stories like this resonate with your heart, like and subscribe for more untold moments of honor and kindness. Let us know where you're watching from, and if this moment brought back memories you carry with you. The best way to honor their memory is to keep listening. Click on the suggested video now, and we'll walk together through another untold chapter of courage and sacrifice.